Every summer, southern Italy recruits an army of casual labourers to pick the country's famous tomatoes for consumers in Europe and beyond. In recent years, their numbers have included thousands of newly arrived migrants, desperate to earn whatever they can to survive. But are these vulnerable people wide open to exploitation? We've been to find out.
This year, around 350,000 people have crossed into Europe from the Middle East and North Africa. For many, it's been a treacherous journey, whether by sea or by land, be they refugees fleeing war or economic migrants seeking a better life. Very few arrivals have official status or the right documents. Most are short of money and don't yet know how they'll survive. The fortunate will be taken care of, but many won't. This is the eye-opening story of just one group of migrants who arrived into southern Italy and who became reluctant recruits in a vast army of casual laborers. It's the story of people like Abdul Kone.
J'ai dû quitter la Côte d'Ivoire comme ma maman, mes frères et autres. Donc pour ça, j'ai quitté la Côte d'Ivoire ici au Ghana, Ghana, Togo, Togo, Bénin, Bénin, Niger. Du Niger ici en Libye. J'ai traversé la mer, entre la vie et la mort. Si aujourd'hui quelqu'un décide de prendre la mer, c'est que il n'a aucun choix. Et présentement, je vis à Tordier. Et depuis ce temps, on est là, on vit, on survit.
Abdul says he's an asylum seeker, a refugee. But earlier this summer, like thousands of others, he traveled to southern Italy looking for work in its fields. There were few other choices he could make.
Le manque d'emploi dans la société italienne, le refus d'intégration de certaines personnes et la misère de certaines personnes. Donc il les oblige à faire certains trucs qui n'ont pas le choix de le faire.
The weakest part of the Italian system remain the integration. People are receiving a support that lasts for 6 months and a maximum of a year. After that, they have to find their way, and this is a very big problem because they can be exploited.
The migrants came here to South Italy's Puglia region, specifically the area around the city of Foggia, known as the Capitanata. Thousands of acres of flat plains that are the heart of Italian tomato production. It's one of the country's biggest industries. Over 1.5 million tons of tomatoes are produced and harvested here every summer. Giuseppe Grasso is the president of APO Foggia, an organization that represents over 900 farmers with fields in the Capitanata.
Il pomodoro, così come si vede, viene raccolto con delle macchine, dopodiché viene posizionato in questi cassoni e caricato sugli autotreni. Gli autotreni partono per le industrie, le varie industrie con cui noi abbiamo rapporti.
Italy is the world's top exporter of processed tomato products, a €3 billion per year industry built on the credibility of the Made in Italy label. 1 in 2 products, stamped as made in Italy and sold on the shelves of big-name European supermarkets, are made with produce from the Capitanata fields. But what those labels don't say is how the tomatoes inside those products were picked, by whom and under what conditions. Just a few hundred meters behind sandy beaches crowded with suntanned vacationers, Abdul and his fellow migrants are hard at work in the fields. It's labor that for years has generated controversy as well as tomatoes, with claims about poor working conditions that the industry has always been keen to rebut.
L'abbinamento della raccolta del pomodoro col lavoro in nero è un luogo comune spesso sfruttato in modo abnorme rispetto alla realtà del problema. La raccolta viene il 95%, se non il 98% viene raccolta meccanicamente.
But that is not what we found. In early August, at the height of harvest time, the fields of the Capitanata were filled with migrant workers, digging out the tomato plants with their bare hands. Seasonal workers who come mainly from Africa and Eastern Europe and live in makeshift shanty towns and abandoned farm buildings scattered across the region. The Rignano Garganico Ghetto, also called the Grand Ghetto, is the one of the biggest of those shanty towns. TV crews are not welcome in a place where so many live illegally, so we used a hidden camera to obtain footage of the conditions inside.
L'impact que j'ai vu ça d'abord, quand j'ai vu le ghetto, j'ai vu ça une décharge de poubelles. Je n'ai pas vu ça, je n'ai pas eu l'impression que c'était un lieu d'habitation où des humains vivaient là-bas. Le ghetto est un lieu, tu arrives aujourd'hui, il y a des gens qui ont construit des baraques et ils font payer, ils placent des matelas de une place, qui vous font payer 40 € la place. Mais ce matelas, tu dors là jusqu'à la fin de la saison. Mais sur ce matelas, peut-être sur une baraque de 20 mètres carrés, on peut mettre jusqu'à environ 80 personnes qui sont très très serrées. Souvent, il n'y a même pas de place pour mettre les pieds pour marcher. Pour aller à la toilette, il y avait des WC en plastique, qu'il y avait des gens qui faisaient la vidange et qui étaient arrêtés, qui ne font plus. Donc maintenant, pour aller dans la toilette, tu es obligé d'attendre la nuit pour aller en brousse. Aucun service d'hygiène, aucun caniveau où l'eau sale peut passer, pas de l'eau potable. La vie du ghetto, c'est une merde. C'est très difficile, c'est difficile à accepter, étant que des humains. Pas étant que des noirs, mais étant que des humains, c'est très difficile à accepter.
Il ghetto è un posto brutto dove il controllo sociale è forte, forte, forte. Quando vivi in una situazione di controllo sociale, controllo economico, controllo della vita, magari stai pure così sui documenti, è difficile denunciare. È impossibile, ragazzi, è impossibile. O devi essere un eroe o devi essere un pazzo totale per denunciare.
Concetta Notarangelo is a volunteer worker for Caritas, a Catholic aid group that provides assistance to the migrants that reside in the Grand Ghetto.
Il ghetto di Rignano è sicuramente uno dei più grandi, però le stime vogliono che solo nella provincia di Foggia abbiamo una presenza in estate di 20.000 persone. Là ce ne stanno 2.000, però la presenza numerosa non sta lì, ma sta fuori da questi agglomerati, che vive più o meno isolati nelle campagne del Foggiano.
Il y a beaucoup de personnes qui sont arrivées au ghetto de Rignano pour travailler. Ils sont là pour se faire exploiter un peu. Disons, pas pour travailler, mais pour se faire exploiter, pour survivre.
When they need to hire workers, the local farmers rely on the services of individuals known as caporales. Although the practice is forbidden by Italian law, a caporale acts as a middleman between the farmers and the workers. He provides transportation for the tomato pickers to and from the fields in exchange for a percentage of their pay.
Matin, les gens se lèvent. Quand aujourd'hui, tu arrives au ghetto, le matin, tu dois te réveiller à 3 heures. Tu te laves, tu te prépares et tu sors au bord de la route pour partir voir les caporales. S'ils ont du travail, ils vous disent, bon, 20 personnes, 30 personnes, 15 personnes, montez ici. Les gens montent. Sans chercher à comprendre ce qui c'est. Et ce caporal-là, qui prend ce champ, il vous apporte là-bas pour aller travailler. Vous devez lui payer son transport, qui est 5 €. On a un champ de tomates. On doit aller récolter une caisse de 400 kg à 3,50 € ou à 3 €. Le travail commence à 5 h et ça finit jusqu'à l'après-midi, 17 h, 18 h. Il y a d'autres qui font 12 heures de travail pour gagner au minimum 25 euros, 30 euros par jour.
In Italy, the minimum wage for agricultural work is 7.5 euro per hour, and the working day cannot exceed a total of 8 hours. However, migrants like Abdul are made to work 10 to 12 hours per day. They are mostly employed without a proper work contract and paid on the basis of the quantity of tomatoes that they manage to harvest in a day's time. We met Abdul in the Grand Ghetto as he arrived back home after a day in the fields.
Mais on peut dire Dieu merci, il n'y a pas eu de soleil aujourd'hui. Mais imagine dans la semaine passée comme ça, tu vas aller faire 12 heures, 13 heures de travail sans te reposer. Sur le soleil, moi je me sens toujours mal. J'aime pas travailler sur le soleil. Il y a certaines douleurs là, quand ça va commencer là, c'est pas seulement pour une fois. Ça va peut-être ça va se calmer, mais après là, au fur et à mesure avec le temps, ça va reprendre. Donc je suis trop jeune pour ça, seulement 20 ans. Pour gagner ça même c'est problème. Tu vas gagner 25 ou 30 euros par jour ici à la fin là. Tu vas aller acheter des médicaments des milliers d'euros pour te soigner. Nous, on travaille pour acheter mouton. On ne travaille pas pour devenir mouton.
Emergency a partire dal 2011 ha iniziato il suo progetto in Capitanata per offrire essenzialmente assistenza sanitaria di base, l'ha destinata prevalentemente, visto il contesto di intervento, a migranti e persone in stato di bisogno.
There are no social services in the ghetto, so it falls to humanitarian organizations to plug the gap. Italian NGO Emergency provides medical assistance to the seasonal workers of the Capitanata, and it attempts to monitor the state of their health.
I pazienti che accedono nell'ambulatorio, quello che si riscontra sono soprattutto dolori osteoarticolari, malattie dell'apparato digerente e dell'apparato respiratorio. Quindi questo significa chiaramente che, trattandosi di braccianti impiegati nell'agricoltura, c'è una stretta correlazione tra l'attività lavorativa e poi quello che viene riscontrato in termini di problematiche di salute.
This summer alone, 3 harvesters have died in separate incidents while at work in the fields in the region of Puglia. One of the deceased was an asylum seeker from Sudan, Abdullah Mohammed. Mohammed collapsed and died while picking tomatoes in a field near the town of Nardo, in southern Puglia.
Lui è arrivato il 19 luglio. Una domenica nel pomeriggio. Lui ha dormito, come accade per tutte queste persone che vengono portate qui appunto per fare questi lavori, in una vecchia falegnameria. Il lunedì ha cominciato già a lavorare, quindi dalla mattina è stato portato appunto su questi campi. Intorno alle 14 pare che si sia appunto sentito male, sia stato soccorso da alcuni colleghi di lavoro, è stato chiamato il 118, anche se all'arrivo del 118 lui era già deceduto.
In 2011, Yvan Sagnier, then a university student from Cameroon, was also employed by the same landowner as Mohamed and went to work in the same fields.
Ce que j'ai vu ici à Nardo m'a fait, je suis resté étonné et j'ai été également choqué.
Unhappy with the living and working conditions and dissatisfied by the meager salary, Yvan decided to take action against his employers in a bid to obtain better treatment for himself and the other migrants.
Je ne pensais pas que l'Italie et l'Europe pouvaient traiter les gens de cette manière. Alors là, mes amis et moi, on a décidé, on a dit trop c'est trop. Ici, tu ne nous donnes pas ce qu'on te demande. À partir de ce moment, on ne travaille plus.
Yvan Sagnier's refusal to work sparked the very first labour strike by migrant harvesters in Italy.
Invitiamo tutti a non andare domani a lavorare pacificamente. Lotteremo fino alla fine perché quello che fate il lavoro non è la schiavitù.
For 3 long weeks, the migrants stood their ground and refused to harvest tomatoes. Then, as the valuable crops began to rot in the fields, the landowners caved in to the workers' demands.
Et pour la première fois, les patrons italiens sont venus ici. Ils nous ont dit, garçons, s'il vous plaît, travailleurs, venez travailler. C'est où nous avons compris que nous, en faisant la grève, on est fort, qu'on avait pu mettre en difficulté les intérêts de ces patrons.
Yvan Sagnier also went to the police to denounce the exploitation of the harvesters in Nardo. In May 2012, a wave of arrests was ordered by the prosecutor's office of the city of Lecce. 16 people were apprehended and charged with a number of offences, including slavery. The farmer that employed Mohamed Abdullah, the Sudanese migrant who died that summer, was among those arrested and later released while waiting to stand trial. But 4 years on, little seems to have changed. Migrants are still being exploited in the Capitanata's tomato industry. Subsistence pay and squalid living and working conditions are still widespread.
C'è un vecchio brocardo latino, ei cui prodest, cioè è responsabile colui il quale ha un profitto da questa situazione. Tutti i componenti della filiera approfittano, perché potrebbe essere il solo imprenditore agricolo ad avvantaggiarsi o il solo trasformatore ad avvantaggiarsi di questo. Se l'unico che non avrà profitto sarà il consumatore.
So who might be held responsible? The farmers are the ones who directly hire the workers, but they say their profits are modest and constantly squeezed by processing industries keen to keep customers and shareholders happy.
Il prezzo, voglio dire, è influenzato da una serie di fattori, in modo particolare dal prezzo del prodotto trasformato e dei costi di produzione del prodotto trasformato. L'industria, considerando che spesso loro ritengono di essere costretti a vendere a prezzi più bassi di quello che potrebbe essere il costo di produzione, e cercano di recuperare questo gap cercando di abbassare il prezzo ai produttori.
We were told that at the start of this year, farmers' groups tried to set the price for a kilogram of tomatoes at 10 cents. But by the start of the harvesting season, the processing industries decided that they couldn't or wouldn't pay more than 7 cents per kilo, a 30% decrease. At the same time, in supermarkets across Europe this summer, a 400-gram can of peeled tomatoes was selling for around €1.4. Price difference between the product picked in the field and the packed product retailed to consumers is in the order of 5,000%.
Le industrie che noi forniamo si trovano per la maggior parte nell'agro nocerino sarnese, circa a 250 km da qui, ma anche ci sono industrie allocate in zona come la Princess, Castellano, Conserve Italia, eccetera.
One of those companies, Princess Limited, a wholly owned subsidiary of Mitsubishi Corporation, runs the largest tomato processing plant in all of Europe. It is located right here in Foggia. As well as being a supplier of own brands products to major supermarkets in the UK and elsewhere, Princess also produces and sells tomatoes under its own labels, the most prominent of which is the popular Napolina brand of tinned tomatoes and sauces. During harvesting time, the factory works around the clock. Hundreds of trucks drive out of the gates carrying Princess labelled blue and AR labelled azure crates. We'd been told that the crates are then delivered to local fields where they are filled with tomatoes before being taken back to the factory in Foggia for processing. We decided to follow these trucks to see how these tomatoes are harvested. The first led us to a field being harvested by a machine. The next truck we followed headed out of the Capitanata. The third time around, the truck left us in a cloud of dust near an isolated field. We decided to fly a drone over nearby olive trees to get a closer look. Adjacent to the same now parked Princess truck were migrants, picking tomatoes by hand, with no machines in sight. So we followed other Princess trucks. On at least a dozen of occasions, we found that crates bearing the prince's name were being filled by foreign seasonal harvesters, loaded onto trucks and then driven back to the factory in Foggia. We showed photographs of the crates bearing the prince's logo to migrants in the ghetto. Many of those we spoke with confirmed that they filled the same crates with tomatoes while working in the fields. In one of the shanty towns of the Capitanata, where Bulgarian harvesters live, one worker even agreed to discuss this on camera.
Tu hai fatto questi?
Sì.
Hai fatto questi qua? Ma questi anche adesso, questa stagione hai fatto? Questa zona qua, Borgo Mezzanone?
Sì.
E quanto ti pagano a cassone questi qua?
Poco pagato.
Che vuol dire? 3-4 euro?
3,50.
3,50?
3,50.
E quante ti fanno il contratto per lavorare oppure
Non
no?
fare niente.
Niente?
Non fare niente qua. Niente, non fare contratto di lavoro. A nero fare.
Tutto nero?
Nero. Un giorno lavorare, trovare altre persone più poco soldi, lavorare. Altri rumeni.
Ah, rumeni?
Andare pure per 3 euro, per 2,50 euro lavorare.
E quante ore lavori al giorno su questo? 6 ore, 8 ore, 10 ore?
Se c'è 4 camion, fare pure 10 ore. Nessuno fare contratto.
Nessuno?
Nessuno. Prendere documenti, codici fiscali, dare, nessuno fare contratto.
Of course, Princes is not the only tomato product manufacturer in the Capitanata, but it was the one whose trucks we saw most often, and crates bearing its logo were often to be found in fields across the region. So we asked Princes Limited for an interview. We wanted to hear what they had to say about complaints from migrant tomato pickers about poor pay and conditions, but our request was declined. However, ANICAV, the umbrella organization of packaged food industries in southern Italy, to which Princes belongs, agreed to meet with us. We showed its president, Antonio Ferraioli, the Bulgarian tomato harvesters interview.
Innanzitutto c'è da dire che la Princes non è che ritira il pomodoro attraverso delle associazioni di produttori agricoli, quindi diciamo che alla fine non è che il lavoratore bulgaro lavorava per la Princes, lavorava per l'agricoltore che forse poi ha portato il pomodoro alla Princes.
It seems that Princes and others in the tomato processing industry are not legally liable for the treatment of workers hired by farmers from whom they source their product. But could consumers consider them to have some moral responsibility for a supply chain, at the bottom of which are migrants who have no choice but to work?
Noi non vogliamo negare il fenomeno esiste, non è sicuramente generalizzato a tutto il 100% della raccolta, non riguarda solamente il pomodoro, per cui bisogna averne piena cognizione e ognuno deve fare poi la sua parte per cercare di risolverlo.
Later we wrote again to Princes to ask if it wished to respond to some of the issues raised by this film. In a statement, its spokesman said the company was committed to fair and ethical trading and required suppliers to observe good working practices. The statement went on.
Princes has an absolute respect for human rights and opposes any form of illegal labour. Contracts with tomato suppliers clearly stipulate, with regard to the workers employed, that all rules of the national collective agreements, laws on national insurance and medical care, and all legislation related to immigrant workers and health and safety are to be respected.
What is clear from this story is that in this one corner of Europe, and in this one industry at least, desperate migrants seeking a new life are wide open to exploitation. But in other industries and in other parts of Europe, similar examples can surely be found. For many, this harsh truth will be in bitter contrast to the dreams of a safer, more prosperous existence that brought them here in the first place.
The absence of legal framework is influencing so much the life of these people. Since the very beginning, when they escape, their life is threatened. They are subject to abuse. When they arrive in Europe, and in this case in Italy, the risk of seeing this abuse to be reiterated continuously is very high.
Quand je vais au supermarché, j'achète, même à la maison, quand je mange des tomates, mes yeux se remplissent de larmes d'abord, parce que je pense d'abord à les frères et à les sœurs qui se font détruire. Donc ça me donne une haine envers certaines personnes. Cette haine est adressée directement aux multinationales, aux riches, aux autorités qui voient ces trucs qui ne réagissent pas. C'est envers eux, c'est adressé, pas à personne d'autre, pas aux innocents.